Good evening. This talk falls under the broader category of adaptive layouts. Specifically, I will be talking about sliding pane layouts. So the sliding pane layout is a layout for list detail patterns. I'm sure many of you have come across that term. So it basically involves a list of items which you can scroll through and click, and if you click on it, it will present a detail view. So the sliding pane layout is a list detail pattern that is optimized for different screen sizes and orientations. On the left-hand side, the image that you see is an issue that is common to many Android tablet apps where there is a lot of unutilized space. So on the right-hand side, we have a layout that Google would like us to use in this particular case. And the reason is because of the rise of foldables and Android tablets in the last 2 years or so. In the middle, we have an emoji that represents dismay from an iOS dev, because they have been beautifully designing tablet apps for many years, largely because of the success of the iPad. So what I'm going to do is it's just a very simple presentation. Actually, I'm just going to go through a Colab, and I'm going to begin with a starter project, which represents the old way of doing things. So I'm just going to outline the code before we actually look at the code. So we have a list fragment, which contains a recycler view and a list adapter. We then have our detail fragment. Both fragments share a view model, which is activity scoped. If we click on an item, we will update the currently selected item. And then the detail fragment, when presented, will, via live data, have the latest current sport to present. And when we click the item, we navigate to the detail fragment via a nav action, which we define in a nav graph. So I'm just going to briefly take a look at the code. So we have the live running app on the right-hand side. We'll just rotate the screen, and we see there's a lot of unutilized space. Right now we are seeing the view model. So we have the currently selected sport, mutable live data. We have the sports data for the list. It's an array list. And then we have a method here to update the current value, update current sport. We're just going to have a look at the layout. It has a frame layout, and inside is a recycler view. We also then have the nav graph, which has the two fragments defined and the navigation action defined. So now, I'll just quickly switch to the final project to hopefully save some time. Okay, so now we're just going to have a look at the outline of the final project. So we have the list fragment, but now instead of a frame layout, we have a sliding pane layout, and it has two children. So the first child is the recycler view, as we had before. The second child is the detail fragment. So the detail fragment is effectively inside the list fragment. When we click an item, as before, we will update the current sport. The shared view model remains the same. But now, instead of navigating to the detail page, we will call the open pane method of the sliding pane layout. Just some considerations is the width threshold for the sliding pane. So if we have a narrower width than the threshold, then we will have either the list view or the detail view showing at any one time, and there will be an animation between the two. It'll slide. But if the width is greater than the threshold, then we will see both panes at the same time. Back navigation, there's just one complication, and it's that when the detail view is shown, when you have a sliding pane, and only the detail view is being shown, when we press the back navigation button, we don't want the activity to stop and the app to be sent through to the background. We want the detail view to be dismissed, and we would like the master view to be shown. Then the swipe gesture config. The swipe gesture can be linked up to the sliding pane so that when you swipe with your finger, the sliding mechanism is activated. So I will just go through the code now. So firstly, I'll just show the sliding mechanism. It's in a way, it feels like a bit of a misnomer because it's really more of an adaptive layout that can slide in certain cases. But yeah, anyway. So in this case, it is sliding. This is a foldable. We can rotate the screen as well. So in this case, we see the master and detail view presented. And then on the tablet view, we also have that similar situation. Okay. So what I would just like to draw your attention to is the layout inspector at the bottom. So we can see a skeleton layout here on the right-hand side. This is the detail view. So when we select an item, then the detail view animates into view, and the same for the reverse. Okay, so now if we look at the layout, we have a sliding pane layout instead of a frame layout, and then we have the recycler view and the detail container. We're just going to look at the layout width. So we can see a width of 550 dp for the list view and a width of 300 for the detail. But that's not the actual width. The actual width is defined by the layout weight, which is 1, which fills up to the space of the view. But if you add up these two, 300 and 550, that defines the threshold, where if it's less than a certain value, it'll slide. If it's greater than a certain amount, both views will be shown at the same time. Okay, so I mentioned the back navigation. So in order to implement that functionality of dismissing the detail pane and not dismissing the activity, we will take the on back press dispatcher of the activity and add a callback. So in this callback, the on pressed callback by default has an enabled field in the constructor, and we will set it enabled if it's slidable. In other words, if we've got a narrow width and we have a sliding capability, and if it's currently open. And then that enabled field is actually set in 2 places, or 3 places. So first is the default. And then if we open the panel or close the panel, we will toggle the is enabled. And then a key method is the on back pressed. So at this point, we would have a detail view showing, and we would like to dismiss or close the pane, and then so that works. Then just to touch on the lock mode. Just one thing about the back navigation. There is a bit of a bug. So I'll just go to a detail item, and then I will, so what we would expect is if we press the back button, we would go back to the list view. But after rotating the screen and coming back, it actually dismisses the activity. So that's just a bug that is listed online. It's on a GitHub issue, and hopefully that is resolved soon. In terms of the swipe gesture, so the swipe gesture is actually called the lock mode. And so right now, now, when I'm moving my mouse, I'm trying to do a swipe gesture. It won't slide. But if you comment out this portion and run the app again, we will have sliding capability. So now when I slide, it activates correctly. Google recommended in the Colab that for this kind of app that you disable the sliding mechanism. I haven't been able to figure out why that is the case. I've asked some colleagues and they can't figure out why, but if there are any members of the audience who have any insight as to why that is, please do present that on Slack. I'd like to know. Okay, so many of us have been experimenting with Compose, I imagine. And so what I thought is that for the sliding pane layout, there would be a Compose version that would work equally well. And what I've found, and this probably reveals my lack of understanding of Compose, is that there is no sliding pane layout, according to what I saw. And if you wanted to implement this kind of functionality in Compose, you would have to use a box with constraints, test the width. If it's less than a certain value, then you would render one layout, and if it's greater, you would then render another layout. So that concludes the talk. Look forward to hearing some questions.